At the end of our questions, they'll have a 3-minute closing. We did invite numerous media outlets to join us. There is one joining us today, and 2 of them, because of the Crooks fire, asked that we share a link to the video that we are taking with them, which they will use for their rebroadcasting purposes later. I would ask that we allow the candidates the opportunity to answer questions, that we be respectful of their answers. They're here to share with us their opinions, their thoughts, their positions, so let's give them that opportunity, and we will work through that as quickly as we can to hit as many of these questions as possible. A committee from our board of individuals that are not affiliated with any campaign came up with this list of questions, and should we run out of our list of questions, we may find time for questions from the audience. We'll see where we get to from there. In an effort to help aid our candidates, when you get down to 15 seconds remaining, I will stand up from my chair before cutting you off. That will be your heads up that your time is about to expire. Does that sound fair? Okay, very good. So we will start with our first question. And if you need me to repeat it, please let me know. With the current slim majority in the Senate and the possibility of the majority being lost in either chamber, how are you going to work with others on one or both sides of the aisle to pass legislation that benefits the residents of Yavapai County and the state of Arizona? Noel, you can go first on this one.
You know, I've already done that. When I was in the legislature, I spent 6 years getting things done. The Interstate I-17 that's under construction right now, I worked on that 6 years. I couldn't have gotten that done had I not brought Democrats across the aisle to support what I'm trying to do. When you try to get money out of the legislature, you just can't get it out of one side. You have to convince the other side that it's a worthwhile project. I did that on the I-17, all right? The same with the airport terminal here. I got the airport $1,250,000 out of the transportation fund. I couldn't have done that unless I convinced my Democrat members on my committee to support what I wanted to do. And that's how business is done in the legislature. You have to work. You have to convince members to come over to your viewpoint. All right, I did that. The same way that I've been trying to put together the Save the Dells as a regional park. I've been trying to get money from the state park for the state park system, which would then support our position on making the Dells a regional park. We don't want to lose that iconic location. Prescott's growing around us so fast, and it's a difficult moving piece of legislation and work to get that done. But I had to reach across and have those members on my committee support me for that. Unfortunately, the State Parks Division didn't have any money at all in their coffers to even come up with, but we're still working on that. And then I worked across city lines 7, 8 years ago when we had the drug rehab problem. You remember we had 200 drug rehab houses here in town? It's terrible. Kids were dying in there. That's how I got involved in politics. That's the main reason I got in politics. And when I worked on this issue, not one of these other politicians were helping me. Not Karen Fann, and not Ken Bennett. They couldn't be bothered with that mundane stuff of drug house. So I got the city residents to help me. I got our city council members to help me sincerely on this issue. And the upshot of that is we went from 200 drug rehab houses down to less than 25.
I'm a common sense guy. I am a business person. I will work with the legislature to try to get common sense, business-oriented legislation through. I am not in favor of increasing taxes. My opponent was. Our taxes on gasoline are very high. They would be even higher if his legislation had been passed. In addition, the ratings of different groups come up to different scores. One of the things that I know is that the American Conservative Union ranked Noel Campbell 67% out of 100% in terms of his conservativeness. He did vote with the Democrats a lot. That's not something that I will necessarily do because I'm not going to change my conservative values. I will continue to be true to lower taxes and less regulations because that's what's killing our small businesses today. I can't allow businesses to be choked out. The thing with getting funding for different projects, most of those projects wound up costing more money to you, the taxpayers. I don't have a problem with the extension of the airport. I think that was probably a good thing. But Mr. Campbell did not do that by himself. He had a lot of help, and he takes credit for the entire thing, just like the expansion of the I-17 freeway. He thinks that he did it all by himself. The drug rehab program, yes, they did indeed reduce the number of drug rehab houses here in town. However, there was no mechanism put in place to maintain the lower level. And as you guys have seen locally, recently, the numbers are going back up because nobody's regulating and nobody's enforcing the rules with respect to the number of drug rehabs. The problem is getting worse by the day, and we're just about at the point that we were when those corrective measures were put into place. I think there are a lot of things that you need to look at. The establishment politician is responsible.
You'd like to use one of your 2 rebuttals? Okay, you have a minute and a half.
First of all, after we got the drug rehab problem under control, 2 or 3 years later, we got these homes to have to certify and register with the Department of Health Services of the state of Arizona. So every drug rehab house in this state has to have a license now. And that has strict ramifications for how they run and condone these houses. So any house that's operating in Prescott today is under state licensure, and any complaint made has to be investigated. That's number 1. Secondly, as far as gasoline taxes and what I wanted to raise, last night my opponent said that he wanted to do a holiday on the gas taxes. Taxes in Arizona are 19 cents a gallon. That brings in $750 million a year by roads. If we go to a tax holiday, that's the only way our roads can be funded. We wouldn't be able to fix a pothole if we followed what he'd like to do. And so, as far as my rating with this outfit that he talked about, I didn't go down to the legislature to be a star for certain ultra-conservative groups. I went down there to get things done. And so when I do that, I have to be able to work across the aisle. I've demonstrated that for you. Thank you.
Okay, moving into our next question. This one's a little detailed, so again, if you need me to repeat any of it, please let me know. The Greater Phoenix Economic Council is actively enticing businesses to relocate to Arizona based upon an abundant water supply. However, the Arizona Department of Water Resources has consistently stated its concern that various state aquifers are experiencing reduced levels due to continued groundwater mining. Also, Arizona's allocation of the Colorado River water was recently reduced, resulting in decreased water available from the Central Arizona Project for agricultural use. Since the state legislature is responsible for developing state water policy, what policies do you propose to introduce at the state legislature that will get Arizona's water use to safe yield? Steve, you're first.
Water is a huge issue in Arizona, and it always has been. There are lawsuits going on right now that have lasted for 100 years over the water issues in this state. They're still going on today, the same lawsuit. I've met with several experts in water locally. One of the things that I would do, there's a law on the books right now, a statute that says that you cannot charge builders a certain amount of money. For example, new construction only. Let's say that every time that a builder comes in and makes money by developing new homes, $10,000 goes into a fund. That fund is called a sinking fund. The money builds up to pay for water infrastructure. Right now, there is no money available for that. I don't want to see people that have owned their homes for 35 or 40 years here in Prescott, for example, be charged for the money when they finally decide to put in the infrastructure. There's no drinking straw that goes into the big Chino aquifer. When that goes in, it's estimated at about $500 million to put in the infrastructure associated with treating that water and getting the water out of the ground. That's a lot of money. I don't want people that own property in Prescott losing it. People that are coming from other places to live here, $10,000 will not make the difference as to whether or not they buy here or not. They're going to buy anyhow. We need the money set aside in a program. The money is generated in Legislative District 1. It stays in Legislative District 1. It's managed by trustees that have fiduciary duties over that money. Right now, that can't be done. The builders lobby has been strong, and they have this legislation that was passed a few years ago that requires no money can be set aside for these purposes. As far as I'm concerned, I will work hard to get that legislation repealed and to get laws in place to establish a sinking fund for the water that we need in this area. It's a complex problem. Conservation is a good way to start. It's necessary. We've done a good job here in Prescott, but there are other areas in the community that have not within the county.
Time.
So those are the ways I address the water issue.
You guys started impact.
Well, I'm going to presuppose you all know what an active management area is. We have a Groundwater Management Act that was done in 1980. At that time, Arizona had about 2.5 million population. That Groundwater Management Act is almost 42 years old, okay? And that set up two laws, surface water and groundwater. The Arizona Constitution says that groundwater belongs to the people of Arizona, and it only becomes private property when you pump it out. So whoever pumps that water out owns that water. But underground, it belongs to the people of Arizona, and as such, the legislature can regulate its use. Now, this Groundwater Management Act created the active management areas. There are 5 of them. These areas are set up to protect our water resources and to ensure that we put as much water back into the river, to the aquifer as we take out. The problem with the active management area is too small, because the water up here is common to both the other side of the Mingus Mountain and here. What I mean by that is the Big Chino feeds the Upper Verde River, and the Upper Verde goes into the middle and the lower, and all those people live in Clarkdale and Cottonwood and Jerome and that area. They want to maintain that river because it's the only perennial river we have still running in Arizona. So if we expand the active management area, it gives us more control about how our groundwater is used. Suffice to say, right now, we have 13,000 exempt wells taking groundwater. And an exempt well is a well owned by a homeowner on a couple acres of land, and that homeowner is not required to do any reporting to the Department of Water Resources. So we don't know how much water any of these 13,000 exempt wells are using. And the big commercial wells in the active management have to report their water usage. But once you get out of the active management area, you can pump all the groundwater you can pump because nobody meters it, it's not required. That's got to change. We need to know how much water we're actually taking out. We have scientific studies that show that the wells, there's 30 monitored wells around the basin that show over a 30-year period that our groundwater use wells levels are decreasing. And we need to work on that.
All right, our next question. Please identify the 3 top pieces of legislation that you will submit in your first week and elaborate on the most important to you. Noel, you're first.
It's something I really haven't thought about, but I'll think about this real quick. As far as election integrity, I would submit a bill to the legislature that required that any mail-in ballot that you receive not only has to be signed, but you have to have the last 4 digits of your social security number on it. And why do I do that? 80% of Arizona votes by mail. And there's a problem, that has been in the past, of once you fill out your ballot, you put it in the envelope and you sign it, there could be fraudulent activity going on. But anybody who would fraudulently sign a ballot would not know that person's last 4 digits of the social security. If you wanted to get tougher, and I support all kind of good restrictions on making it easy to vote and hard to cheat. The second thing I would propose is that with a mail-in ballot, you have to walk it back to the registrar to show your proof that you are who you say you are. So those are certainly 2 pieces of legislation I would work on. The next important thing would be to visit the Groundwater Management Act to expand the active management area, which would cover the whole county. I firmly believe that the county, Yavapai County, needs to have the whole area as an active management area because we'll have better understanding of the groundwater we're using. All right. And third, I would put a bill in, and I worked on this for 6 years to get funding from the state to fix Highway 69, to widen it. Because you know how bad that highway is, 27 stoplights. Like, we can do it. We have the technology to do it. It's just a matter of getting the money and working across and getting other people to support what you do. I'm pretty good at that. If you go down the I-17, you're going to see construction going on. And that's taken a long time coming. Those are the 3 things that I would do.
Tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. I will find waste in the budget. There's a lot of it. The categories in the budget don't equate to where the money's going. There's a lot of money wasted in our budget, and we can fund infrastructure with that money. The bills that I would push, first of all, Article 5 of the United States Constitution. It allows for a convention of the states to change and modify the terms of the Constitution. In 2017, I believe it was, there was a law passed in this state that voted for an Article 5 constitutional convention. Right now, there are 19 states that have agreed to it. With 34, they can do that convention. It's a horrible idea, because once you call a convention of the states, you don't control what gets done. I would repeal that bill that is part of our law today that says that Arizona is agreeing to an Article 5 constitutional convention. I also would push legislation to eliminate what they call ESG. It's the social credit scores that people can get, kind of like China does. They are keeping databases on each and every one of us. Those databases are huge, and the purpose is, oh, you're a conservative, your social credit score is lower. As a result, you can't have access to travel, you can't have access to your money in the bank. It's a really pernicious, awful, terrible idea. We need to stop it, and stop it now. I will work hard to pass legislation to make sure that doesn't apply in this state. In addition, there's a bill that was passed. Actually, it was co-sponsored by my opponent here. That bill was to eliminate the Electoral College in favor of the national public vote. I'm against that. The Electoral College is there for a reason. Our founders were brilliant. They put it there so that the large states in population could not tyrannize the small states like Arizona. I would never vote to reduce your power on a national scale for your vote on the President of the United States, which my opponent did.
Time.
Thank you.
All right, Tom's going to ask our next question. Sure, this will be your second rebuttal. It's your last one.
You know what? He's absolutely right. I made a mistake. I made a freshman mistake. When you get down there, you can barely find the bathrooms. You've got a learning process going on. And so our conservative guy who works with all the conservative candidates was pushing this idea. And it sounded like a good idea. We didn't realize later what a bad idea was because it affected how President Trump won the election. But I made a mistake. And I admit my mistakes. I don't hide them. Everybody's going to make mistakes. You think this guy's not going to make mistakes? Believe me, he will. And I don't think he's going to get much done down there either. I mean, I just don't think that, but what do I know? You know? So that's all I wanted to say.
For the record, that consultant that pushed him as a freshman into voting for something that he now agrees was a bad idea, that is his political consultant today. He goes by the name CQ. He still hires him, even though he pushed him into making a bad decision. I wouldn't do that. Doesn't make any sense to me. Just thought you should know.
I have a little administrative,
I had no idea.
Steve, I'm not gonna pose this as a question, but as a point. There's so much conversation on the border and our esteemed president's handling of the border and the 18 million people we're gonna have living here as it goes. I don't know what a state legislature can do or not do, but it's certainly a concern to probably everybody in this room.
I agree. The border is a huge issue for us right now. What I would do is I would complete President Trump's wall. The wall needs to be built. My opponent believes that because there's an Indian reservation, which is a sovereign nation, on the border, that we can't build the wall. I don't agree. The wall needs to be built. I would meet with tribal chiefs, the tribal council, and come to a conclusion with them, a negotiated deal. Either we put the wall on the border, leaving the reservation on our side, Arizona's side of the fence, the wall, or we put the wall on the Arizona side on Arizona property. And the reason we can do that, it's our property, we can put up a wall where we choose to. Obviously, there'd have to be some openings so that people can come through, but they'd be checkpoints, just like there have always been on the border. So that people have to have a legitimate reason to come into Arizona. We need to stop the drug trafficking, the human trafficking. That's one of the things that we can do. In addition, we can change the role of the Arizona Rangers. The Arizona Rangers right now are volunteers. We can change the role of those volunteers into legitimate law enforcement officers to enforce the border. The border is porous right now. There's one other thing we could do, and I recommend it strongly. Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says that if we are being invaded, we have the right to basically sue the federal government because it's their obligation to protect us against invasion. Read it, Article 4, Section 4. The state of Arizona needs to sue the federal government for an injunction requiring the federal government to do their job and to enforce the Constitution so that we are not invaded from the south. A lot of the people coming over are not good guys. They're terrorists, they're gangbangers, they're very difficult, bad people that we don't need in our country.
Time.
So I worked 27 years on the border. I speak Spanish. I worked in Central South America. I know this issue, all right? We'll build a wall where we can build it. Yes, of course. But if you look from Nogales to Yuma, that's 160 miles of federal bombing range, a Goldwater bombing range, Oregon Pike National Monument, federal reserves, and the Totem Odom Indian Nation, all right? Now, Mr. Zipperman calls himself a constitutional attorney. He knows if you build a wall around the Indian Nation, you're walling in U.S. citizens. And you have a gate there, so our U.S. citizens will be checked every time they go from the Indian Nation into Arizona. Well, we have a little thing, Mr. Zipperman, called the Fourth Amendment. And I think you know that. It's illegal search and seizure without probable cause. That is not going to work, sir. And you know that, and I know that. So let's find out what we can do. Here's what we can do. Around the Indian Nation and around that border, we know where choke points are. We only have to stop 20% of the smuggling activity to be a great deterrent. I know that because that's what I did working in area interdiction. If we knock down 1 in 5, we arrest 1 in 5, we deter the activity. So we do that. And also we can, as Arizona legislature, we can put pressure on these 501c3 community groups that accept these illegal immigrants. We can ask them to keep their location and ensure that they show up for their immigration hearings, because if they don't, we as the state of Arizona can take away their tax status. We can do that. And so that's another added strength that we can do to stop smuggling activity. But I'm telling you, this idea of walling off people, walling off U.S. citizens, think about it. We're not Chinese. We don't wall off the Uyghurs. We're not going to do that with our Native Americans. It's just not going to happen.
This will be your last rebuttal.
The Fourth Amendment has nothing to do with the border, okay? Illegal searches and seizures of people, American citizens, is what the Fourth Amendment deals with. There's a lot of case law related to it. None of it has to do with the border. I will tell you this, there are other things that can be done. We have to strengthen our relationship with the tribes on the border, leaving it up to them whether the wall goes on our side or on the border side. It's up to them. They can either be on our side or the Mexican side with the cartels. In addition, there's a lot of legislation that can be passed and is in existence. There are trespassing laws right now that are effective, but they have to be enforced. Right now, the DPS doesn't have enough manpower to do it. One of the things that they can do is the DPS can be given the authority to deputize people to work with them, to increase their manpower and not increase the cost substantially. There are a lot of things that can be done that are not being done. Creating a criminal illegal alien database. They don't know who is coming and who is going and whether they've come multiple times. A serious database needs to be created of the people that are trying to come over. There are things that can be done to strengthen the border. Right now, the federal government isn't doing its part, and because it's not doing its part, we're suffering the consequences. We need to force the federal government through that lawsuit that I talked about to do its job.
Shifting gears to education for a little while, our Arizona public schools are failing to educate our students as demonstrated by the low scores in standardized testing. In addition, public schools are not preserving parental rights in regards to their children's education. Parents in Arizona and elsewhere have been very vocal in their opposition to political indoctrination of students and want public schools to return to teaching a basic traditional curriculum. The state of Florida, as an example, the legislature and governor has done an excellent job in passing legislation that keeps political ideology out of the classroom and ensures that traditional education requirements are taught. We need greater accountability and oversight in our schools. What is your plan to introduce legislation like Florida's plan for our schools, and to ensure current and future laws to protect our children are being adequately enforced? Because this is a two-part question, we're going to give you a little bit of extra time. So we'll go 4 minutes to talk about this education question. And I believe Noel's up first.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I'll get to the very end here, because there's quite a bit in the top part here. We need greater accountability and oversight in our schools. What is your plan to introduce legislation like Florida's for our schools and to ensure current and future laws to protect our children are being adequately enforced within the schools? I think that hit the nail on the head. That was it.
Yeah, oversight. First of all, the legislature appropriates money to the schools. We presently appropriate over 54% of the budget of Arizona. That's $7 billion goes into public education. Now, we appropriate $7 billion, but we cannot tell the school districts how to spend that money. That's where the school boards come in. School boards are the entity that manages how schools spend their money. That's why we're working so hard in Arizona to elect conservative school board members, because they can hold the school board's feet to the fire. That's the law, okay? We appropriate the money, and for example, Prescott Unified has a school board. They direct how that money is spent. If it's not being spent properly, then that school board should take a good hard look at that. Let me just briefly tell you, there's 3 areas of school education that have nothing to do with education. That's janitorial services, food services, and transportation. They eat up a big budget of every school district, but that could be farmed out to private enterprise, because it would lessen the liability that the state has for pensions for these employees. So that could happen. We could, right here in this district, we have 3 school districts that overlap each other. We could go economy of scale, but they fight that. They would never agree to that, because you're chopping somebody's rice bowl in a sense. They want these jobs, okay? But that certainly could be looked at. So that's oversights with the school boards. And I'm absolutely opposed to giving more money to public education unless the accountability and the grades come up. If money was the solving problem for school problems, every kid that graduated from high school in New York City would be admitted into an Ivy League school, because they spend $28,000 per student. So there's no correlation between money spent and academic achievement. What really determines that is parental involvement. That's why charter schools do so well. That's why private schools do so well. That's why homeschooling does so well. It's because of parental involvement, and that is the absolute key. Now, I support in education anything that works. I always have. That's why I support private schools. That's why I support charter schools, which are public schools, by the way. And that's why I support homeschooling. And that's why I support empowerment scholarships, because we want an education person. We only get one chance to educate a kid, and we have to do it right. And so many, not so much up here, we do graduate 85% of our students up here, but down in the metropolitan area of Phoenix, Hispanics are graduating, males, the whole student body, at 52% of Hispanics are graduating from high school. That's terrible. African Americans are graduating about 80%. That's good. So we want to get graduation rates up, and so you have to hold these school districts accountable, and that's done by school boards. And that's where I would start, and that's why I support what our Republican Party is doing about trying to elect conservative school boards up here in our school districts.
56% of our budget, the entire budget of the state of Arizona, goes to K through 12 public education. I just looked at the numbers. $14,326 per student per year. $13,000 per student. If the schools had to compete for the money, which they don't today, they never have. If the schools had to compete for the money because the parents got the choice, I'm going to have my child, I don't want them exposed to CRT and social emotional learning. I'm pulling my kid out of school, I'm putting them in private school, charter school, or homeschooling them. If the money followed the child, the public schools would be in a bind. Either improve the quality of the education that you're providing or go out of business, one or the other. And I don't think they're doing a very good job. Right now in Arizona, K through 12 public education, our results are that we are 49th out of 50 states in the quality of our public education. It stinks. It's horrible. They're not doing a good job. I contend the reason they're not doing a good job is because they don't have to compete for the money. Competition raises all boats. It's what makes America strong. It's something that we need to return to, and we need it to apply to the public sector, just like it does the private sector. You know, when Ma Bell was broken up into a bunch of pieces, we all whined and we said, oh my God, it's the end of the world, we're not going to have good phone service. Instead, we got more choices, less cost, everybody benefited because of the competition that it generated. I think that we need to look at that as a serious model. We need to pass legislation to make the public schools compete for their money. No matter how much they get, they're getting $16,209,143,500 right now, every year. That's this year's number, $16.2 billion. They're not doing a very good job with that money. How do you get them to start teaching civics and history so that children can become better citizens, more capable of voting and knowing what their government's all about? We have to do something to improve the quality. I believe that parents, it's not fair to the parents to have to pay for private school or homeschooling alternatives and also pay for public schools that are doing a miserable job. They're paying for the public schools, but they're not getting their money's worth. The best way is not to pressure the school boards. The best way is to make the schools in general compete for the money. If the school boards are just told you have to compete or you're going to lose your students and lose your funding, I think they'll improve their game. Very important approach to education. I think we need to make the public schools compete for their money.
Thank you. Gentlemen, this topic is a little larger than the 3 or 4 minutes you're given. I'd like you to add a couple minutes and touch on the magic word that so many people throw around called vouchers. And Steve, you were getting pretty close to it, so why don't you continue?
I think there are a lot of variations on what a voucher can be or is, but I think that in general, the concept that I'm in favor of is that I don't call it by a name. I don't give it the voucher name, but the truth is the money needs to follow the student. Right now it doesn't. The student goes to homeschooling, the parents have to pay for homeschooling, the public schools still get paid. So I believe that the student should be able to go wherever the parents choose. The parents are the ultimate decision maker as to the education of their child. If you don't like what they're teaching, if the STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, if they're doing a bad job, the parents should be able to say, you know, there's a charter school over here that's doing a much better job. I want my child to go to a charter school. This one right here, I think the parent should have the choice. This is parental choice. You hear that term a lot. That's what the parents should have, is the ability to move their kids where they believe the kid's going to get the best education. If the school's teaching social emotional learning, which is another word for CRT, you know, critical race theory is something that a law was passed a couple of years ago to say no more critical race theory. And what happened? Instantly, The left came up with another term for it, calling it social emotional learning. It's the same thing that's branded differently, and they're teaching our kids in violation of the law. We're not teaching CRT. Well, they are. And we need to enforce those rules, and what better way than parents pulling their kids out of those schools that are doing that? Mom, they're telling me these things in class. What do you think? I think you're not going to go to that school anymore, and I think we're going to move you to a better place. The vouchers should allow the parents to make the ultimate decision of how their children are educated. Parents always want the best for their kids. The ones that don't are kind of messed up. The truth is the decisions that the parents are going to make are going to be in the best interest of their children. I can't imagine parents that are going to be making bad decisions, and I think the parents should be the ultimate decision maker and should be able to put their kids where they believe they belong.
Thank you. Noel?
I don't know if you know this, Steve, but we have vouchers here in Arizona. If you go to a charter school, which is a public school, you get 90% of the money from the state that a regular public school kid gets. They get 100% of their allocation. Charter school, which is a public school, they get 90%. But that means that public school has one less student to deal with, but they get to keep the extra 10% of the money. So it's kind of a win-win. The school has less students, the public school, but the charter school, the parent can send his kid on state money at 90% funding. Now, these charter schools don't have all the facilities that the public schools do. They don't have football stadiums and track, they don't have cafeterias, but they have parental involvement. That's why charter schools are so effective, but they are public schools. Now, the other form of voucher we have is called an empowerment scholarship account. This is a voucher that is eligible for 25% of the students in K-12 in Arizona. 25% are not using it. Only about 6,000 students are using it. But who gets to use an empowerment scholarship account? If you're a Native American, you can choose that program, and that will pay for homeschooling or private schooling, all right? It'll also pay for education needs, all right? So if you're a Native American, you qualify. If you're the son or daughter of an active duty military personnel, you are eligible for an empowerment scholarship. If you're the son or daughter in K-12 of a deceased military veteran, you're eligible. So the eligibility for the empowerment scholarship covers 25% of every student here in Arizona, but not a lot. They don't use it that much. Only 6,000 students are using it now, and that's because a great number of the students or parents that haven't been in public school are satisfied. But we have the system for the parents to make that choice already. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have it. Now we can expand empowerment scholarships to cover more different categories, and we're working on that. But I supported empowerment scholarships when I first got to the legislature. I support in education anything that works. We only get one chance to educate a child. So I'm there with you on vouchers. I'm there with the money following the child. I'm there for charter education. I'm there for private education. I'm there for parental involvement. If it works, we do it. If it doesn't work, we get rid of it. Okay? Thank you.
Shifting gears to public safety, when you dial 911 in Yavapai County, in most areas, the fire department shows up, the police department or sheriff's department arrives, but most recently, over now 600 occasions, there are no ambulances available. The certificate of necessity that Lifeline Ambulance and AMR operates under precludes another ambulance service from operating. Most recently, CAPMA has been allowed to operate rescues under substantial scrutiny and numerous complaints by Lifeline and AMR to the state EMS board. If you are elected, would you focus any time and effort on looking at the CNO process and working with the governor's office to address our ambulance shortage that we have here in our community? I believe, Steve, Noel, you're first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely I would. I mean, let me just state that I am not in favor of expanding more government employees through CAPMA. I don't think that's a good thing. It's a burden on the taxpayers because the pensions come into effect, and I don't, as a general premise, want to expand government under any circumstances like that. However, if we have a need and it's not being met, we need to look at that. And that certainly, one of the things I would do is get involved in this issue in a hurry. I've heard what's been said. I'm not able to really evaluate it. The issue is CAPA trying to build an empire? That's what you hear, versus private enterprise being shut out of the system. I don't have an answer for that yet, but if I get down there, it's one of the things I'm sure that the residents up here and CAPA are going to want me to look at, and I will certainly look at that. But as a general overall proposition right now, I'm not in favor of expanding CAPA. Thank you.
I personally have taken this issue very seriously from day one. I don't expect to hit the ground flat-footed. I'm going to hit the ground running. I've met with Chief Freitag, the head of CAPMA. My campaign manager and I met with him for about 2 hours to find out what his take was on this crisis that we're suffering in Yavapai County. In addition, we spent about 2.5, 3 hours with a guy named John Valentine, who's the regional director for AMR Ambulance. That was very enlightening because they have very polarized views of how this problem needs to be solved and dealt with. In addition, Dave, my campaign manager, and I drove down to Phoenix and we attended a hearing that was called in one of the committee rooms down at the Capitol by Karen Phan. That meeting was to discuss a bill to modify the Certificate of Necessity law, which hasn't been looked at in 20 years. That law, Judy Burgess has proposed a modification to that law. She had a bill when we were at that meeting. The bill had red print, green print, and blue print, in addition to the black existing statutory language. Some of that language came from the fire department, part of that language came from the ambulance service, and part of that language came from the governor's office. Judy Burgess has a bill pending to modify the language of that Certificate of Necessity law, which is at the heart of this problem. Competition, once again, makes it better for everybody, and having a competing system for the work and to make the money is better than having a monopoly in either side, either the government or the private sector. So it's being worked on, and I was encouraged by the fact that this hearing took place. The language is being negotiated. It appeared that everyone was on board trying to work out a solution to the problem. Meanwhile, people are being injured and don't have ambulance service. We need a resolution fast. I will do whatever I can to help resolve this issue. I'm very much aware of it. I know who the players are, and I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to make this problem go away as soon as possible. I think the Certificate of Necessity bill is the problem, and they're working on it.
Staying on public safety, the city of Prescott several years ago passed a temporary sales tax to address their PSPRS debt. Numerous other agencies in Yavapai County, including CAFMA, Yavapai County Sheriff's Department, and others, still have tens of millions of dollars of unfunded pension liabilities. Every time legislation has moved forward to address PSPRS issues, it has been overturned by the courts as unconstitutional. Do you have a plan or a proposal on how to address the shortcomings of PSPRS in the coming years?
It's a really complicated issue. Obviously, they've been working on it a long time. The sales tax bill that was passed, what it did is it reduced the unfunded liabilities in our area. However, there's still a hole in the bottom of the bucket. So they fixed the problem in a temporary way, but not in a permanent way. I think this problem partly is because the people that are managing the PSPRS fund they're people that are getting money from that fund as retirees. They have a vested interest in it. I would like to see the management of that fund be an independent organization, somebody that doesn't have an interest in the outcome, personally. I don't think they've done a very good job. The return on invested dollars is very, very low. I think that they're not being observed and watched and scrutinized carefully enough. I would do what I can. It's not an easy problem. There are a lot of rules and regulations and limitations on anybody trying to do anything to change any of that system. We've made a dent in it, but the problem continues to get worse in many areas within Legislative District 1. I think that the sales tax eventually will come to an end, and the people will have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to continue it. But there are issues that are very, very complex that need to be looked at. Everybody does. The fire department wants to get their pensions. I don't blame them. The police department wants to get their pensions. They've earned them. The problem is nobody was looking far enough ahead to make sure that the money was in the pocket to take care of them when they were out there taking money from the fund. So how do you fix it? More taxes? I don't think so. I don't like taxes. I'm a conservative. I'm a consistent conservative, and I won't vote to raise taxes if I can help it. And that, if I can help it, is in a very rare situation. I think that there are other solutions that make a lot more sense. Maybe providing help to the management of the PSPRS system so that they can get a better return without risking the funds, so that there's more money coming into that fund than currently comes in. But it's a hugely complex issue, and there are no simple solutions that are going to resolve it. None.
Yeah, my first year in the legislature, I took an ad hoc committee all over the state to get involved in PSPRS, which is the pension fund for our firefighters and police officers. That fund was really underwater. You have to understand, every city, every county is responsible for its PSPRS liability, all right? The city of Prescott was way underfunded, and that's why we instituted the tax, and I think at the last hearing, we're probably around 60 or 65% funded. Okay, so every entity is responsible for their debt. There are some cities like Bisbee that are funded at 5%. And there's reasons for it. Early on, we let officers retire way too early on medical. And so they quit paying into the fund at a young age, but they drew benefits for years and years. Now we have changed the law. We have gone from a defined benefit program to a defined contribution program, all right? Over time, that will cure the issue, okay? But it's over time. In the meantime, different cities and different counties have to deal with their debt liability. It's possible that the city of Bisbee could go Chapter 9 and file bankruptcy. Then the question is who makes up Bisbee's debt? That is not defined in the regulations for PSPRS. It's something they never even thought about, okay? But if a city or county goes underwater and they file Chapter 9, somebody's got to make up for their pension liability. Who's going to need that? That's an issue that, believe me, needs to be looked at. And I can tell you, when I was in the legislature, the police and fire unions were absolutely opposed to going to a defined contributions program. They wanted defined benefits, and I understand the reason why. But we had to do that. It was a tough choice. I think over the next 30 or 40 years, we'll work ourselves out. But Steve is absolutely right. The return on the investment from the contribution that these officers make has not been well invested enough to give a great rate of return. We certainly need to look at the investment strategy. We've had to do that every year we were there. Unfortunately, on the whole, PSPRS is probably funded overall probably below 50%. I'm sorry to say that.
Thank you. Next question. Do you feel that the emergency powers vested in the governor are too broad, given our recent experiences thanks to COVID-19? And would you author or support legislation to curtail those emergency powers in your first term in office? Noel, you're first.
No, I would not. That's why we've given the governor, who is the elected official for the whole state, that authority. That's why he's governor. And he needs that emergency power if it's a true emergency. So I wouldn't be in favor of reducing the emergency powers that he has. I think the issue is he doesn't use them enough, or he uses them too few, okay? But we cannot have emergency powers vested in the legislature. Man, could you imagine? We can't even agree what day it is down there half the time. I mean, it doesn't work. So it's got to be the governor. That's the elected official of the state. So no, I would not take away any of his emergency powers. I would just hope we elect a governor that's got good common sense and knows when to use those emergency powers.
One of the proposals that's out there right now regarding these emergency powers is limiting them to a 10 or 15-day period. It makes sense that you need one person, an executive of this state, to make a decision. Oh my God, there's an emergency. But if the powers, okay, we're going to put a state of emergency into effect, but if those powers only lasted maybe 2 weeks, say 15 days, at the end of that time, or during that time period, other people need to weigh in. The legislature, for example, should have the ability to say, no, you've exceeded your authority, which is what happened with the COVID emergency. Hey, we have an emergency, it's in effect, and now I'm going away for several months on vacation, not to revisit that issue. It's really bad. We're stuck with what was put into place, and there's no way to get it undone. Once the governor declares a state of emergency, we have one, and it's absolute. I don't think that that power should be vested in one person, absolute power. I think that the legislature, maybe a committee of the legislature, should take a look at emergency powers when they're instituted and say, okay, 2 weeks, fine. The emergency's over. We don't have a COVID emergency right now, so let's terminate, we'll allow it to terminate automatically at the end of the 2-week period. Something like that makes a lot of sense, as opposed to giving someone fiat power where they can just decide for us, this is the way it is, and we're all under a state of emergency with no ability to back out of it, and no checks and balances in the system. Our whole government is based on checks and balances. You don't want a tyrannical form of government where the person in charge gets to make decisions with no compensating factor being considered. That's my view.
I have, to that state of emergencies thing, I saw one in the paper today on the current fire situation. And there was a state of emergency established and $200,000 for God only knows what, fight the fire, I guess. How does that play into what we just talked about? Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I think if there's a fire, that's a great example of a true emergency. Nobody's going to question. There's a fire. People's homes are at stake. The national forest, the areas in Arizona are at stake. Personal property, private property is at stake. So it's legitimate to say there is an emergency. I think that that's fine. But just like I mentioned a moment ago, if it's a 2-week period that state of emergency stays in without being approved by that committee that I was talking about of the legislature, if they say, yeah, the fires are still raging, we need to extend it another 2 weeks, fine. If they don't, then it automatically expires. So it's not a continuing thing. Once you declare an emergency, should it last for 20 years if you don't go back and undo it? That's what we have now. It would be a continuing state of emergency until the governor changes his mind and issues a ruling that no, the emergency's over. We need somebody there to look at what the governor's doing and make a decision as to whether or not it's appropriate, whether or not it needs to be extended.
Thank you. Noel?
Yeah, fire season. I fought fires for 10 years as a tanker pilot, but I'll talk about that in a second. Listen, that's why he's the governor, all right? If you have to have a committee to decide if there's an emergency or not, that won't happen. You will not get any committees to do that. That's why we have that power given to the governor. That's the authority of the governor, the legislative branch. Now, pressure will be brought up if it's extended too long by the citizens through their representatives. They'll make their issues known. They'll put pressure on the governor if they think he's gone too far. But you do not want to limit the emergency power of the governor, because in a true emergency, he has to act, and he has to act quickly. So I've already told you my position on that. So quickly about fires. Yeah, you know what? It's a big issue up here, and I want to quickly talk about it. We almost lost this town 20 years ago, okay? And having fought fires, and I flew out of the tanker base here for 2 seasons, every time a tanker takes off out of this base, he has to have a special waiver because the runway's too short and it's under strength, okay? So with the new airport terminal we have, that's a segue into getting federal money to lengthen the runway and strengthen it for bigger commercial jet traffic, but also for the fire bombers that we cannot get into this airport right now, all right? And that's something most people don't think about, is that the airport is not long enough or strong enough. It's not. We need to work on it. If I get reelected, I'm going to be the first one down here working with the County Board of Supervisors and other people to rectify this problem. It's a lot of work.
Thank you. I have a question actually from one of our residents who, are paying the rent here. So a significant amount of legislation is voted upon and passed without every legislature having even read the bill or understand it. If elected, would you run and support a bill requiring all state legislators to certify in writing under penalty of law that they have read and understand the bill before they vote on it? Failure to certify would not allow a legislature to vote on the measure. No.
Well, of course, every legislator down there is going to certify that he's read the bill. Of course. You think he's not? Listen, I hear this canard all the time about legislators don't read the bills. You have to be an attorney to read the bill. That's not how it really is. We all read the bills down there. We read bills in our committees. We read bills all the time. Those of us that are not attorneys, we have a staff of attorneys that break these bills down to us, that complex language. You yourself can go on the internet and read a bill and read the plain language version of the bill, okay? So when you hear this stuff about legislators are not reading the bills, I'm telling you that's not true. They all read them. They all read them, all right? They're complex bills. What happens is our leadership in the House and the Senate determines which bills are going to move forward, all right? And those are the bills that get out of the main committees and get up to voting on the third read in the House and over in the Senate. So, don't believe that. It's not true. They're hardworking people down there. Really, they are. And everybody that serves there loses money. They don't pay anything. You have to have a house down there to live in. Everybody that serves down there serves out of a good motive. I mean that. I never met anybody, I met people I disagreed with, but I never met anybody in the legislature that was down there to feather their own nest. I never have. Okay? So think about it. You've got to have confidence in the people you elect. And don't listen to these wild accusations that have no basis in fact. It's not true. Thank you.
Some of you heard about the lawsuit that was filed by the Yavapai County Republican Committee, YAVCOP. That lawsuit had to do with a bill that was passed about 3 weeks ago that removed the ability of precinct committeemen, what's called PCs. Those people were unable to be elected, but were instead to be appointed by the Board of Supervisors. They took the ability of the people to vote away from the people. I was present in court here in Prescott when the judge ruled that that was an unconstitutional bill. And the judge put on the record in that case that the reason he was doing it was because the legislature had admitted that they had not read the bill. Every legislator that signed on to it had admitted that they didn't read the bill. I swear to you, I will never sign a bill. I will never vote for a bill that I haven't read, that I don't understand. A lot of them use their political consultants who say, you need to vote this way, or a lobbyist that says, this is really good, you need to go that way. They don't rely on the lawyers for that. The lawyers in the basement down at the Capitol are used to draft legislation. And half of the legislators there, not being lawyers, don't know whether the bill that they got in their hand says what they told them to write, because they don't understand the language. Knowing the language is critical. It's a critical skill for someone that you're hiring to write legislation, laws, statutes that impact you and your family's lives. I won't sign, I won't vote for a bill. I won't give it my approval unless I've read it. And that means that a lot of bills may get stuck on my desk, because if I don't have time to read it, there were 17,000 bills in this session. That's a lot of reading. But you know what? Lawyers read a lot of statutes along the way. We learn how to read quickly, and we learn how to read accurately and parse the relevant and important language. That's how we make our living. I did it for 28 years. I'll continue to do it as your senator. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move into our last question. We've bounced from public safety to water to education to fire to what are you going to do in your first week. I want to talk for 1 minute here, or 2 minutes each, that defining moment, that thing that occurred that made you realize, this is my time, this is why I'm choosing to run. I will share my story so that you have some context to my question. I always knew I wanted to serve, and I was watching Channel 13, and my good friend, Steve Blair, said up on the council dais, well, I won't be here when that happens. And I yelled at my TV, well, I'm gonna be here when that happens. And the next day is when I decided that I was gonna run for office. So I'd like to have you both share what made you decide to do this and give a little bit of context to it, and then we'll move into closing statements. Thank you.
You know, I've served this country my entire life. Honestly, I have. I went in the Navy as a young man. I served 5 years on active duty. And then I spent another 17 years in the Navy Reserves. When I got off active duty, I went to the U.S. Customs Service, and I was a special agent for U.S. Customs. That's like an FBI agent. I did investigations of air smuggling and smuggling cases all up and down the line in Mexico, Central America, and I've already told you about that. And after I retired at age 57, due to mandatory retirement, you have to retire at 57 in law enforcement, I looked at myself and what can I do? And so I started flying, I went to Alaska, I got a flying job, and pretty soon they put me on fires because they needed that aircraft that I was flying to be used on fires. And so I got into the firefighting, and it taught me so much about wildfire fighting and wildland fighting, okay? And I flew both fixed wing and I flew rotorcraft, okay? I have dumped water and retardant on firefighters, can't tell you how many times. And they enjoyed it sometimes they didn't. But I know the fire season, I know what these guys are going through here. I worked out at the tanker base. And so at age 70, approximately, I always wanted to serve. And because I was in federal law enforcement, I could never be active in politics. They had a thing called the Hatch Act. But when I got into 67, 70, 80, I woke up and I went down to the Republican Party apparatus and said, you know, I'd like to be a candidate. And they said to me, well, what have you done for the party? I said, well, I haven't done anything. I'm a good citizen. I'm a Republican all my life. I voted for Barry Goldwater, and I voted for every Republican since. And I think I'd be a good candidate. They said, hey, man, you've done nothing for the party. The establishment here wouldn't help me and did everything to hurt me. The first 2 times I ran, I lost. The third time, I figured the system out, and I won. So I have been an independent, conservative Republican all my life. I don't kowtow to the establishment here. Mr. Zimmerman knows who the establishment is because he's not favorite either. But I'm an independent guy and pragmatic. I'm much more pragmatic than Mr. Zimmerman is, I believe. So with that, I became your state legislator for 6 years. And I was happy to do it. And as I said earlier, it costs you money to serve. But I've made my way in life. I'm not a career politician. I never wanted to be, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. And if I win this election, that's good. And if I don't, I go on with my life. You know, I'll serve my community in other ways. But I chose to live my senior years in active service to my community. And that's why I serve. Thank you.
I don't know that there was a specific moment that I woke up, but I've been watching what's happened to our country, and I've watched our First Amendment rights go down the drain when they closed churches so people couldn't go pray because of COVID. That was one of the things that I observed. I've watched our Second Amendment rights be eroded by the federal government, where they keep lists of who owns what firearms, who bought what firearms, contrary to the law. I've seen a lot of things happen that really disturbed me greatly. I've seen our border laws ignored by the federal government. It's been a buildup over time. Now, service, at 17 years of age, I joined the United States Army during the Vietnam War. I spent 3.5 years on active duty and another 2.5 on inactive duty. But while I was active, I spent 2.5 years at Walter Reed. I took care of an awful lot of guys coming back that were missing limbs and worse. I enjoyed my time in the service because it was service. Yeah, it was brutal sometimes, but I served my country, and it gave me a strong sense of belonging and that this country is mine. I'm not willing to give it up easily. I'm a strong Second Amendment advocate. But let's talk about trying to do the right thing through service. I went to that same Yavapai County office, and I became a precinct committeeman. And I've been doing that for several years. I became a state committeeman. Why did I go to the state committeeman position? Because I didn't feel that I was able to contribute enough as a precinct committeeman. I had things I wanted to see done, and I couldn't effectuate those changes at that level. So I became a state committeeman. Once again, I was disappointed. The party wouldn't allow me to do enough in my service to the community to change things that I saw that I didn't like. So then I decided, okay, what else can I do? I will become the first vice chair. And within the organization, I ran for the office, and I was successful. I was the first vice chair of the Yavapai County Republican Party. That's the #2 position in the county. I did that for a year before I decided to make this run. Resigned that position so that I could dedicate my time to this position. I believe that this gives me an opportunity to make changes that need to be made. I'm here to effectuate what the founding fathers had in mind when they set our country up, try to reinstill traditional American values, try to put the right attitude and the right thinking into the decisions made by our government. One of the things that I won't do, you won't see me voting on to Democrat bills. Many of the people in the legislature, in order to go along and get along, I want my bill through, so I'm going to vote for their bill. What we've been seeing is an erosion of conservative values. It's happened year after year after year, where the people that you have elected and put into office are not doing what you want them to do. They're compromising too much. One of the things I learned as a negotiator, I've negotiated thousands of transactions. You don't go into the building to negotiate until you separate things into 2 lists. These things I will give away. These things are not negotiable. I will not give on those. And one of the problems that our legislators have had for years, they don't do that. So when the left comes to them and says, we really need this. Okay, they don't think about it, and the good stuff goes away along with the bad. That's wrong, won't happen while I'm sitting in the seat of the Arizona State Senate.
And Steve, we're going to give you an extra minute just to wrap up your closing statement.
Okay. I'm a hardworking guy. I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm an America First. I'm not apologetic about it. I'm an America First candidate. I believe that this country is great. I believe that we need to fight for what's right in this country and in this state. Arizona is a strong state with a great history. I love Arizona. I will die in Arizona. It's my chosen home. I had 49 states to choose from. This is the state I wanted to be in. This is the state I belong in. I will work and fight hard. I am a hard fighter. I solve problems and I fight to get what's right. And I'll do the same for you as your elected senator. Give me a chance. Just because I haven't sat in the chair doesn't mean that I won't do the best job. Believe me, it's skills that you bring with you. It's not history. Thank you.
Well, before I do my closing statement, since I have an extra minute, and I just want to tell you, that's not the way it is down there. Really, it isn't. You got hardworking people down there that are trying to do the best for their communities, really. And so I don't want you to think that all those people are down there, don't read their bills, or doing this, or doing that, lobbyist this and lobbyist that. He'll figure that out. You won't hear a word about that after he gets down there if he gets elected, because he knows, and I know, and you know, that you have to cooperate to get things done down there, or you don't get anything done. And one thing is for sure in the legislature, if you lie to somebody and you give your word and you make your word bond, you're done down there. You're really done. They won't deal with you. So I've got things done for my community, and I've worked across aisles to bring those Democrats across to my point of view, and we see the results of that. I've talked about that already. So in closing, you know, when deciding who to vote for, I like to think of our candidate politicians as horses, really. First, we have the show horse. That's the horse that has the shiny coat and the polished saddle and the ribbons wrapped around its leg. That's why it's a show horse. Well, unfortunately, today, our show horse is not here with us. So he's absent. And so now you have to deal, but the show horse is only good for show, okay? Now you have to deal with what I consider the stronger candidate, which is the workhorse. He's the one with scratches on his face and scars on his back from working the barbed wire fence in the freezing rain and the hot, hot heat and the super cold. He's the one you put a saddle on when you want the work done. That's why he's the workhorse. And I'm the workhorse in this race. I am. And I have a record of work done and completed while I was plowing. First of all, the unregulated sober living homes. I fixed that problem, and now they're under state regulation. The I-17 improvement project. That is happening as we speak right here. That's a $500 million job that's going to add 500 jobs to this area. The new Prescott Airport Terminal, which is going to lead to even better advances in our firefighting and commercial air traffic as we go. And finally, working to prevent the Granadales from being overdeveloped and preserving the Granadales as a regional park for this city. It's sadly needed. So, I've told you what I've done. And I'm not going back down there to feather my nest or to not read bills or to become a quasi-Democrat or anything like that. I'm a conservative guy. But you know, you need to send somebody back down there that's got some common sense, that's not going to alienate everybody, who can work across and get things done. If you believe as I do that that's how things happen, then I ask for your vote. And if you think that the right way is to cast aspersions and conspiracy and all this other stuff, then you should vote for my opponent. It's as simple as that. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you both.